Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy this content, please hit that subscribe button right now.
What's up, Jays Nation? Welcome back to the channel. And if you're new here, buckle up, because what I'm about to walk you through is one of the wildest rotation stories in recent Blue Jays history. We're 5 days out from opening day 2026, and John Schneider just confirmed the 5 names that will take the ball for Toronto to start this season. On the surface, it sounds routine, right? Manager announces rotation. We all nod. We move on. But here's the thing. This isn't just a list of names. This is a survival story. This is what happens when a rotation that was supposed to look one way gets absolutely shredded by injuries, and what crawls out of the wreckage is somehow more compelling, more unpredictable, and potentially more dangerous than what the front office originally designed. Let me paint the picture for you. Shane Bieber, injured list, forearm issue. Jose Barrios, stress fracture in his elbow, no timeline for return. Trey Yavage, the electric young arm everyone in the organization was buzzing about this spring, shoulder impingement, starts the season on the IL. And Bowden Francis, gone. Tommy John surgery. Out for the entire year. 4 arms, 4 guys who were supposed to be foundational pieces of this staff, unavailable. Just like that, the carefully constructed pitching blueprint Toronto spent years building got crumpled up and tossed in the trash. But instead of collapsing under that weight, instead of limping into April with a makeshift patchwork staff that screams, "Please just get us to June," the Blue Jays rolled out a rotation that carries its own legitimate, honest-to-goodness case for optimism. And I'm not talking about spin. I'm not talking about damage control. I'm talking about 5 pitchers, each with their own narrative, each with their own fire, each with something real to prove. Kevin Gausman, Dylan Cease, Cody Ponce, Yariel Rodriguez, Max Scherzer, that's the rotation. And when you dig into what each of those names actually represents, you start to realize this might be one of the most fascinating starting staffs in baseball. Let's start at the top with Kevin Gausman, because if there's one guy on this roster who deserves the opening day assignment, it's him. This isn't some ceremonial nod to a veteran who's coasting into retirement. This is Kevin Gausman, the guy who has been the backbone of this rotation for 4 straight years, the guy who threw 193 innings with a 3.59 ERA in 2025, the guy who went out there in the World Series last October and delivered consecutive quality starts against the Los Angeles Dodgers. Let me say that again, consecutive quality starts in the World Series. That's not a footnote in his career resume. That's proof of composure under the absolute heaviest competitive pressure you can experience as a pitcher. Gausman is 35 years old now, and here's the kicker. He's in the final year of his 5-year contract. You know what that means? Contract year. And if you know anything about professional athletes in contract years, you know they don't coast. They don't mail it in. They don't take possessions off. There's a clarity of purpose that comes with knowing this is your last chance to define your value, to show the league what you're worth, to cement a legacy. Gausman doesn't need external motivation. The stakes are already built in. Financially, professionally, personally, this season matters in ways that go beyond the win-loss column. And here's what makes him even more valuable in this specific moment: durability. Since he arrived in Toronto, Gausman has made at least 31 starts every single year. He doesn't break. He doesn't fade. He takes the ball every 5th day like clockwork. For a team that just watched 4 rotation arms go down in flames before the season even started, having your opening day starter be exactly who you expected, building up exactly as planned, on schedule, healthy, ready, that's not just comforting, that's foundational. That's the anchor holding everything else in place while the storm rages around it. Then we move to Dylan Cease, and this is where the conversation shifts from solid veteran presence to legitimate ace-level dominance. The Blue Jays didn't just sign Dylan Cease this offseason. They committed 7 years and $210 million to him. That is not a depth move. That is not a nice piece to have kind of signing. That is a franchise-altering statement about what this organization believes it's building and what Cease himself represents as a competitive weapon. By the sheer financial weight of that contract and by the evidence of what he did in Chicago, Cease is a genuine ace. Not a number 2 guy. Not a solid second option behind Gaussman. An ace. A guy who can carry a game on his own terms, who can dominate a lineup with a slider that moves in ways that make professional hitters look foolish. If the injuries hadn't happened, the big debate heading into April would have been whether Cease or Berríos pitches third in the rotation. That's how stacked this staff was supposed to be. 2 world-class starters at the top, fighting over who gets the ball on day 3. That framing has obviously shifted now, but here's what hasn't changed. Dylan Cease himself. He's the same pitcher, the same stuff, the same competitive fire. His presence at the top of this rotation doesn't depend on who else is healthy. He's here because he's one of the best pitchers in baseball, and that $210 million contract is about to start paying dividends. Now let's talk about the guy who might be the single most fascinating story in this entire rotation, Cody Ponce. And I need you to understand, this is not your typical journeyman finds his footing narrative. This is something structurally stranger, more dramatic, and way more compelling. Ponce pitched parts of 2 seasons with the Pittsburgh Pirates. He posted a 5.86 ERA across 20 appearances. He was, by every measurable standard, not a major league caliber starter, so he left, went to Japan, then Korea. And in Korea, with the Hanwha Eagles in 2025, something fundamental changed. He went 17-01, let that sink in. 17 wins, 1 loss. He posted a 1.89 ERA. He set the KBO's all-time single-season strikeout record with 252 punch-outs. He struck out 18 batters in a single 9-inning game, and he won the league's MVP award. This wasn't a guy having a nice season overseas. This was a guy who went to the other side of the world, completely rebuilt himself as a pitcher, and came back as something that barely resembles what left. The Blue Jays saw what he did in Korea and signed him for 3 years and $30 million, the largest contract ever given to a pitcher coming back from the KBO. And here's the thing. This spring, Ponce has validated every single dollar of that investment. Through 5 Grapefruit League starts, he's carried a 0.66 ERA. His fastball is touching 96 miles per hour. He's developed a changeup overseas that functions as a legitimate out pitch, the kind of weapon he never had in Pittsburgh. The Blue Jays' organizational philosophy around pitch development, around arsenal design, around turning raw stuff into usable weapons. It fits perfectly with what Ponce built in Korea. He's not walking into this rotation as a name filling a vacancy because of injuries. He's walking in as one of the most intriguing competitive stories in the entire American League. A guy who left as a struggling reliever and came back as a strikeout machine with MVP hardware and a chip on his shoulder the size of the Pacific Ocean. Then there's Yariel Rodriguez, and his situation carries a different kind of tension. Rodriguez wasn't originally slated to be a starter in 2026. The plan before the injuries piled up was for him to work as a long reliever, the kind of flexible depth arm that absorbs high-leverage innings without a defined rotation slot. But when Yavij went to the IL, the calculus shifted. Rodriguez is now a starter. And here's what makes this particularly interesting. Free agency follows this season. Think about that for a second. Rodriguez is about to spend an entire season in the starting rotation visible from week 1, with performance metrics that accumulate in the most trackable, most scrutinized context in all of baseball. That's not just an opportunity. That's a stage. That's a chance to define his market value in real time, to show every team in the league what he can do when given consistent opportunities. He's not pitching to survive in that slot. He's pitching to prove something about himself, to set himself up financially, to show that he belongs in a rotation permanently. That's the kind of motivation that doesn't need a pep talk. It's built in. Every start matters. Every inning is an audition. And then we get to Max Scherzer, and this might be the most layered, most complex element of this entire rotation story. Scherzer turns 42 years old in July. The days of him throwing 200 innings are gone, and nobody's pretending otherwise. He's not going to be the guy who wins 3 Cy Young Awards anymore. But what Scherzer brings to a young pitching staff, what he represents in terms of competitive culture and professional standards, that can't be measured in ERA or strikeout totals. This spring, Scherzer threw nearly 9 innings and allowed 0 runs. 0. At 41 years old, in a rotation spot that most people would assume is just a veteran presence placeholder, he went out there and dominated. But beyond the numbers, there's something that happens when a guy like Scherzer is in your clubhouse. A guy who's been to the mountaintop multiple times. A guy who's won World Series rings, Cy Young awards, who's been the best pitcher on the planet. His competitiveness isn't decorative. It's not nostalgia. It's visible in how he prepares, in how he studies opposing lineups, in what he communicates to younger pitchers about adjustments, about sequencing, about the mechanical precision required to execute a game plan under playoff-level pressure. Toronto doesn't need Scherzer to be the pitcher he was at 32. They need him to be useful. They need him to be durable enough to bridge a couple weeks when someone needs rest. They need him to be present as a competitive standard bearer, the guy who shows the younger arms what it looks like to prepare like a champion. The spring evidence suggests he's capable of all three. And honestly, having Max Scherzer as your 5th starter, even at 41, is a luxury most teams would kill for. Now let's talk about what all of this is building toward, because it's not just about making it through April. The Dodgers series at Rogers Center is scheduled for April 6th through the 8th, World Series rematch, the first genuine measuring stick of the season. And if the rotation holds to sequence, Toronto is lining up Scherzer, Gausman, and Cease to face Los Angeles. Read that lineup again. Scherzer, Gausman, Cease. That's not a patchwork response. That's not a let's just survive this week kind of staff. That's a legitimate, competitive top of the rotation going head-to-head with the defending champions. Regular season games in early April don't determine playoff seeding, but World Series rematches carry their own gravitational weight. They demand answers. They expose weaknesses. They force teams to show whether they're legitimate contenders or pretenders. And the Blue Jays, even with all the injuries, even with a rotation that looks nothing like what they drew up in February, are rolling out a staff that can genuinely compete in that series. What the injury situation has actually revealed, when you step back and look at it from a structural perspective rather than just panicking about who's unavailable, is the depth Toronto has quietly assembled over the past few years. The organizational emphasis on pitch development, on identifying arms whose arsenals can be sharpened in the right environment, on treating pitching depth not as insurance, but as core competitive infrastructure, that's exactly what produced the Cody Ponce signing. That's exactly what gave Yariel Rodriguez a functional role when the rotation desperately needed a starter. These aren't accidents. These aren't lucky breaks. These are the downstream results of a front office philosophy that took pitching seriously at every level. The injuries exposed that infrastructure, and the infrastructure held. The rotation John Schneider announced on Saturday is not the rotation Toronto designed. It's not the staff they spent all winter building toward, but in the most precise sense, it's the rotation they deserve. Built from real investment, real scouting, real player development, and 5 pitchers who each carry a reason to compete that goes way beyond just filling a roster slot. Gausman is pitching to cement a legacy and make a contract year statement. Cease is pitching with the weight and authority of a $210 million commitment behind him. Ponce is pitching to prove that what he built in Korea wasn't a statistical fluke, but a genuine professional reinvention. Rodriguez is pitching for his market value, for a definition of himself that only this season can provide. And Scherzer is pitching because the competitive instinct that's driven him for 2 decades doesn't distinguish between high stakes and low stakes, between meaningful games and meaningless ones. It just competes, always. That's 5 pitchers, 5 completely different motivations, 5 distinct narratives converging into one rotation that starts throwing meaningful innings in 6 days. Whatever the injuries took from this staff, and they took plenty, they couldn't take the hunger, they couldn't take the edge, they couldn't take the fire that comes from having something to prove. So here's the bottom line, Jays Nation. This rotation is not what we expected, but it might be exactly what this team needs. A group of arms with chips on their shoulders, with points to prove, with motivations that run deeper than just winning games. Gaussman chasing legacy. Cease living up to a franchise-altering contract. Ponce rewriting his entire career narrative. Rodriguez auditioning for his financial future. Scherzer refusing to let age define his competitiveness. Opening day is April 1st. The Dodgers series follows 6 days later. And when Kevin Gaussman takes that mound to start the season, he won't just be throwing the first pitch of 2026, he'll be launching one of the most compelling rotation stories in Blue Jays history. A story built not from perfection, but from survival. Not from a flawless plan, but from the grit required to execute when everything goes wrong. If you're as fired up about this rotation as I am, smash that like button. Drop a comment below and tell me which one of these 5 starters you're most excited to watch this season. Are you riding with Mad Max at 42? Are you all in on the Cody Ponce Revenge Tour? Let me know. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single update as this season unfolds. This is going to be one wild ride, Jays Nation. Let's go Blue Jays!